I put 40,000 rivermen at her call. Tell her I want Harrenhal.
It's not an exaggeration to say that Alys Rivers has become one of the most important characters in the House of the Dragon that isn't named Targaryen. Despite being introduced in Season 2, she's going to be a main character for pretty much the rest of the series, and there's a reason she has such staying power. Alys isn't just a seductress, you see. She's a witch. And by the looks of things, she's probably the most powerful witch in the entire show, and is superseded only by Bloodraven and Bran in the overall franchise. So what makes Alys so unique? Is she actually a goat or a barn owl like she claims? What's the extent of her power? Is there one? We'll answer all these questions and more, at least from a physiological perspective. So, without further ado, these are the 7 most insane physiological facts about Alys Rivers.
You will die in this place.
She's probably as old as Harrenhal, if not older, but not immortal. Let's start with the obvious point, which is Alys Rivers' age. Up until this point, the oldest witch we know of from the Song of Ice and Fire universe is Melisandre. She's several decades old, if not several centuries old, because she thinks her life is old beyond years. Extending one's age through magical means is a sure mark of extreme power, and some of the most powerful mages in this universe have lived beyond their natural lifespan. Bloodraven is the best example of this, having lived close to a century thanks to bonding with a weirwood tree that artificially extended his lifespan. We've met characters who are older than him in the books, like Leaf, the Child of the Forest, who's been alive for 2 centuries. This implied that Karth's Undying Ones have been alive for centuries. We know dragons can live for centuries. In ancient myths, there are stories about characters like the Grey King and the Gemstone Emperors whose lives were counted in millenniums. And while the ghost of Highheart isn't as old as Brynden Rivers, she too has been alive for an impressive amount of time, living through the reigns of King Aegon V, Jaehaerys II, and the Mad King, Robert Baratheon and Joffrey Baratheon. Characters associated with magic can extend their natural lifespans massively, but that extension is contingent on the kind of transformation their bodies undergo. We'll go into this more in our next point because that'll address the latter half of this video, but let's first establish the former. How old is Alys Rivers actually? Well, all we can safely say is that she's at least as old as Harrenhal, because she says that she's seen the castle shuffle from one hand to another all her life. Now, we can give her some leeway here because it's possible Alys was born during the reign of the Targaryens. At the time of the dance, House Strong was the 5th house to hold Harrenhal, and the 6th overall authority if you count Rhaena Targaryen, the first rider of Dreamfire. Harren the Black spent 40 years building his monstrosity of a castle, but he didn't live in it for a fraction of that time. Aegon the Conqueror burned House Hor into extinction, and then gave the castle to his master-at-arms, creating House Cohaerys. This family held Harrenhal for close to, or just over 40 years, before it was extinguished as well. This is when things get chaotic, because in the next 40 years, Harrenhal goes from House Harroway to House Towers to Rhaenyra Targaryen to House Strong. Many in the series believe she's a bastard from House Strong, but if that were true, she wouldn't remember what Harrenhal's true history was like. Despite their eventual extinction, House Strong held the house for 58 years, which is also the longest any single house has held onto that castle. Alys would have thought of the Strong's time in the castle as a time of peace if she truly was as old as she looks. But when she demands Harrenhal from Daemon in episode 2 of House of the Dragon season 3, she specifically mentions that she's seen it pass from one hand to another for years without either side being grateful for it. That would make her at least a century old if she was born during the reign of House Targaryen in the Seven Kingdoms. But if she saw Harrenhal being erected, which she implies she did by breaking down the exact intricacies of the castle's foundations, then she's 150, 200, God knows how many years old. She could well remember a time when the Storm Kings warred with the Iron Kings for control of the Riverlands, which was well before Aegon's conquest. Clearly, Alys was born to someone of note, because she's given the bastard surname Rivers. In Westeros, that surname's only given to the baseborn children of nobility from the Riverlands. Chances are, Alys is the bastard of some nobleman or woman from that era, right before the Targaryen conquest of Westeros. That would put her closer to 2 centuries in age than 1, and we'd bet that barring any acts of God, she'd be capable of living for a long time beyond a third. But we don't believe she's immortal for a few reasons. We know that the only truly immortal beings in the world of Ice and Fire are the Weirwoods. They're said to be capable of living for thousands of years if left undisturbed, and even when they die, they don't rot. It's possible that children of the forest who are linked to them can live beyond their years. In the books, Bran finds a chamber full of them, hooked up to weirwoods and looking dead. But when he passes him, their eyes follow him, and one of them tries to say something. Even in death, these trees persist, because if they die, weirwoods turn into stone, like the heart of the Raven Tree Hall. Side note, but it's quite possible that Alys is a Blackwood bastard, at least in show canon, because she has thick black hair of that house. The Blackwoods are the only noble family to truly keep the old gods south of the neck, and a few figures from their line have developed magical powers, chiefly Bloodraven himself, who was a Blackwood on his mother's side. It's very likely that their blood is magical, but that alone doesn't explain the overwhelming power and prolonged lifespan of Alys. Bloodraven is a desiccating corpse in the books. Leaf says that if he wasn't attached to the tree, he would have died a long time ago, and that the tree is keeping him alive. The children of the forest were said to live for centuries in exchange for their small population, and in fact, they're the only creatures apart from dragons that we know can verifiably live for centuries. But even the children die after a point, and we know dragons can die of old age, because the greatest Westerosi dragon died that way. Alys Rivers has clearly not hooked up to a weirwood, and she doesn't practice fire magic like Melisandre and a certain someone else. We'll get to that by the end of the episode, so make sure you stick with us to the end to find out. But if she's not attached to any sort of totem that could prolong her life, then how has she lived for so long? Well, there is an explanation right in front of our eyes, and we've sort of seen it as well. She's most likely a child of the Children of the Forest or Green Men. The best possible explanation for Alys Rivers' centuries-long lifespan and connection to the magic of the old gods is that she's a child that some Westerosi lord or lady had with a magical being connected to those same gods. There are 3 such entities that are mentioned in the annals, but only 2 of them apply here: the Children of the Forest and the Green Men. Let's begin with a more obvious one. The Children of the Forest are widely accepted as the extinct precursor race that populated Westeros before the arrival of the First Men. When the First Men crossed the Arm of Dorne, they encountered the Children and fought a war against them to occupy the lands west of the Narrow Sea. Supposedly, after suffering heavy losses, both sides decided to call a truce and signed the pact, which was sealed on the Isle of Faces in the God's Eye Lake. Interestingly, this lake's northeastern shores are home to Harrenhal. The pact's terms were as follows: the First Men and the Children would cease hostilities against one another. The First Men would convert to the Children's old gods, and to seal the deal, a face would be carved on every tree in the Isle of Faces, with Green Men being assigned to protect them in perpetuity. Then a long period of peace blossomed among the Children and the First Men before the First Long Night, after which the Children started disappearing from the realms of men. Yet even before the pact was signed, there were several tales of both the Children of the Forest and the Green Men interbreeding with humans. The unions of the Children and humans are what provided the First Men skin changer genes and the green blood, aka the ability to become a green seer prophet. But the Children of humans and Children of the Forest were often said to be grotesque and twisted, and we know this to be true. The Ghost of Highheart is a hybrid between a human being and a child of the forest, whom many fans within the community expect to be Leaf herself. She's noticeably small and stunted and aged, but Alys is none of those things. She's tall, raven-haired, and beautiful. And if the Green Men and the Children are connected species, then that means the Green Men's children with humanity must also live lives as long as the ghosts. What's more, we kind of also know that unions between the Green Men and humans result in kids that look more or less human. Garth the Green, the mythical founder of the Great Houses from the Reach, was described exactly like a Green Man in several Westerosi folktales. He had green hands, green skin, antlers in some tales, and was said to be a powerful fertility god who made fields bloom and maidens ripen. It's also implied that Green Men also had the powers of skin changing and prophecy like the Children, which we'll get into in just a moment. As we know, folktales in Westeros remember more truths about this world's reality than people care to know. While the Green Men now reside on the Isle of Faces exclusively, it's not impossible for them to mate with a human being who sneaks onto the isle. They've been known to allow that on extremely rare occasions, like Howland Reed a couple of decades before the timeline of the main series. But it's possible that a Green Man wandered out of the isle, because in the final episode of House of the Dragon Season 2, we saw a Green Man near the Heart Tree of Harrenhal right before Daemon Targaryen completed his season-long vision quest. If Green Men are walking off the isle, then it's possible they were mating with human women, which would admittedly have been easier before Black Heron decided to make his castle on the shores of the God's Eye. Either way, Alys is clearly the daughter of a possible Blackwood and either a child of the Forest or a Green Man based on her age, her magical affinity, and her skill set. This means that while she doesn't have dappled skin, 4-clawed fingers, and massive slit eyes like the Children, she has all their powers. And the same is true in the case of her being a Green Man offspring as well. So, now that we've addressed the base foundation of Alys's anatomy, let's get into the specifics. She is a skin changer. In season 2, there's a bit of a throwaway line Alys says to Daemon that might have actually revealed her true nature. She says that she's a 400-year-old barn owl. Then, later, we see her sending a message to someone via an owl, not a raven. It's a detail that feels half like a joke until you realize that she might actually be saying the truth here, at least after a fashion. That's because the owl isn't the only animal associated with it. The other one is a black goat, which, in and of itself, is a symbol of so many things. Remember that weird black goat we've been seeing all over Harrenhal in season 2? Well, that goat also showed up on the Isle of Faces, right before Alys Rivers appeared and sent Adam, Hugh, and Ulf to the Gullet because they were, quote, missing the battle. Interestingly enough, we also see a green man right before Alys appears to Daemon in the Harrenhal Godswood. The implication here seems to be this: she's using some sort of old god's magic to appear in places she shouldn't be. And our best guess is that she's using a combination of Skinchanging and weirwood tea to her advantage. When Daemon has a proper conversation with Alys for the first time, she gives him weirwood tea to help soothe his nerves and kill his nightmares. But instead, his visions become more intense, and Daemon himself starts acting subservient to her. Then there's the tiny matter of him seeing a goat in Harrenhal, and Simon Strong then reacting weirdly to Alys Rivers' presence in the dining hall as though she were some creature. Alys has lived in Harrenhal her entire life. Simon should know her, yet he acts as though she's some creepy thing. We speculated that Alys might be skin-changing or worrying the goat to keep an eye on people, and because we're in Daemon's head for every Harrenhal scene from season 2, we perceive things from his perspective. To him, that goat looks like Alys, but to Simon, who isn't a target of her magic, it looks like a goat, which explains why he's creeped out by Alys in that scene that we mentioned earlier. From his perspective, he was seeing a goat perched upon his dining table, and that's enough to make any man quiver out of sheer weirdness. Season 3, episode 1 also suggests that this is the case because the goat that Ulf sees while taking a dump is the precursor for Alys's unseen arrival. She couldn't have reached the God's Eye unseen because Ulf, Hugh, and Adam's dragons were constantly scanning the skies for threats. But goats are fairly decent swimmers, and if Alys is indeed warging a goat, then she could have swam across the God's Eye in her goat skin and then appeared to our other 3 dragon seeds within their physical landscape. This is possible through one of 2 means. In Daemon's case, it looks like the weirwood tea made him susceptible to Alys's magic, which is why he usually sees her where there should be a black goat. But Ulf, Hugh, and Adam haven't consumed anything made from weirwood, and they see Alys as well. This suggests that she's using skin changing in a completely different form. In the books, it said that there are 3 taboos when it comes to warging, and one of them is warging into another person. Bran Stark warging into Hodor is technically an abomination, and since Alys seems to be a child of the forest, it's not a stretch to imagine her power might be greater than his. She could be warging Ulf, Hugh, and Adam, and even Daemon to speak with them psychically, and there's one other possibility as well. We know that Bloodraven used his connection to the weirwood tree beyond the wall to enter Bran's psychic plane as the three-eyed raven. Maybe Alys can do the same thing by hooking herself up to a weirwood, in which case we haven't even seen her actual body most of the times we've seen her. And that first proper interaction with Daemon we mentioned earlier also happens when he seems to be dreaming. We'll get to which specific power system and physiology she's making use of over there in a bit, but we know that skin changing and suggestion are magical powers that practitioners of green magic possess. So it stands to reason that Alys's half-child of the forest/green man anatomy allows her to access abilities most people seem to have forgotten about. But there's another explanation for Alys's inexplicable appearances, and that is she might be able to teleport. It's undeniable that the goat and the owl are 2 of the animals that share a soul bond with Alys. She's probably been using them to spy on everyone in Harrenhal and the Riverlands at large for many years. But what makes her inexplicable appearances fairly simple to understand and digest is the idea that she might be capable of teleportation. If this were a standard fantasy series or even a fantasy comic book, that's where we put our money first, before mental projections being cast to soul-merged animals. And what gives this theory even more legs to stand on is the fact that temporal and spatial magic do have their place in A Song of Ice and Fire. In A Dance with Dragons, Tyrion Lannister sails down the River Royne with a group of companions. At one point during their journey, they cross the exact same spot in the Sorrows, and the exact same sequence of events play out up until a certain event is changed. No one in the crew is willing to accept that they just looped behind to where they were, and they were probably time traveled just a tiny bit as well. But we as readers know that's exactly what's happened here. Green seers can see the past, present, and future with their power of green sight, and if they're hooked up to a weirwood, that power becomes clearer and amplified. In the books, Martin was going to introduce a plot element where a sorcerer can bind their souls to dragon glass candles and live live forever theoretically, but he scrapped that in order to make its magic align with spatial manipulation as well. Glass candles operate in a manner similar to weirwoods, and they can also allow their users to psychically communicate with another person within their dreamscapes. Quaithe appears in front of Daenerys Targaryen twice in the books after she leaves Qarth, once in a ship and once in Meereen after Dany conquers the city. Both times, she can see and hear Quaithe just fine, but when she tries touching her, she can't. Quaithe herself confirms that she isn't exactly there, and this can only mean that she's appeared to Dany via another means of folding space. Alys Rivers' magic seems to allow her to do exactly this, because yes, we've seen Daemon touching her on occasion, but Daemon's also the guy whom she gave weirwood tea and has been attempting to control. Alys seems a lot more real when she watches Aemond begging for help at her feet, and she hasn't had nearly enough time with him to bewitch the boy. So that's where the conundrum about the source of her teleportation arises from, because ultimately the whole point with her sudden appearances is that they're supposed to feel inexplicable. But whether she's using warging magic or psychic magic to appear in front of the characters she interacts with on specific occasions, she's clearly teleporting her own psyche from one place to another to make that interaction itself possible. Now, if the show reveals that she could somehow enter a tree somewhere in the world and emerge from another, as though she's accessing a personal transit system, then that would change everything. There are several theories in the fandom that suggest that the green men and the children don't just spy using the weirwoods, they teleport themselves through the trees as well, and the Black Gate at Castle Black isn't exactly helping quell these theories. House of the Dragon seems to be making up for all the magic that Game of Thrones overlooked by giving us a taste of what both Targaryen and First Men magic systems are capable of doing. The Green Men themselves are arguably more relevant to the main series, but they debuted in this one, which is itself proof of Ryan Condal's intent. He wants the audience to feel the diversity of the people as well as the magics and threats of Westeros, and the best way to firmly establish that is through the Green Men. And bonus points for answering questions that they might not have answered otherwise. If it turns out that Alys Rivers can somehow use weirwood teleportation, well, let's just say we won't be surprised. But even if that truly isn't the case, her teleporting into people's minds is enough evidence that her baseline physiology is entirely different to what we'd consider human. That becomes even clearer when you consider the next point on our list. She's possibly a green seer as well. The distinction between a warg and a green seer isn't that clear, and a big reason for that is how characters in the world of Ice and Fire view everything magic related as heretical and inhuman. But the fact is, George Martin made it quite clear that green sight is a higher level of old god's power that can only be accessed through specific bloodlines and circumstances. All wargs have a 1 in 1,000 chance of being green seers, and all men have a 1 in 1,000 chance of being green seers. This puts the odds of a person or a child of the forest, or even a green man, being a green seer at the extreme end of things. And even then, things aren't clear-cut. There are characters who possess a semblance of green sight but can never warg, like Jojen Reed. He has green dreams that show him the future, but can't bond with animals like Bran can. Then, there are wargs who can never have green dreams, like Robb Stark most likely, and even Arya and Sansa Stark to an extent. Those who are blessed with green sight possess certain telling features. Among the children, it's said that the ones with the sight are given moss green or blood red eyes to mark them for their gifts, and their lives are consequential but end quickly when compared to other children of the forest. Those with green sight aren't blessed with healthy bodies usually, but every rule has its exceptions, and we do think Alys Rivers is potentially a green seer. That's because she predicted Daemon's death shortly after his arrival. She's been assisting him with her visions, like accurate reports about Grover Tully's days on Earth, and guiding him by telling him what he needs to do to unite the Riverlands. She even gives Ulf, Hugh, and Adam the highly accurate warning about the Battle of the Gullet's status, which would be impossible for her to know even if she flew her owl to Blackwater at top speed. All that couldn't have happened without Alys being able to see the future. And she could definitely see the past, considering she read Daemon like a book and called out his deepest insecurities. Daemon isn't the type to discuss such things with anyone, yet Alys knew exactly how to push his buttons, and that wouldn't be possible if she hadn't seen his past with her own eyes. It's clear that Alys is one of the few with a sight that looks hale and hearty. Even if it is revealed that she's remotely controlling goats and owls to appear in front of people, her body itself still remains functional, because if it didn't, she wouldn't be able to exert as much influence on those she targets as she does. In the books, we're told that every single raven in the world has the spirit of a child of the forest stuffed into it, living out a second life. And it could be that Alys Rivers is just a child that's possessing animals, birds, and brains to maintain their influence over the realms of men. It could even be that Alys's consciousness is just possessing another woman's body and operating through her, which is possible to do, yet quite frowned upon, even amongst skin changers. Yet, whether it's teleportation, skin changing, or genetics that explain her quirks, We can't deny that she, at the very least, is privy to information she simply should not possess. And because the show opts to keep hair color as the only identifiable sign of a person's lineage, magical or otherwise, we'll sadly never know if Alys' eyes are a hint at her true nature. But considering everything we've told you guys, it's more than likely that Alys Rivers is an offspring of a magical entity with the power of skin changing and green sight. All of these powers fundamentally alter her physiology, and we hope we've done a decent job of explaining just how. But even with all these changes, there's still one thing about her human anatomy that remains unchanged, and that is, she can still have children. This is a massive spoiler, but by the end of the House of the Dragon, you'll learn that Alys is at least part human because she has a human child with none other than the one-eyed prince, Aemond Targaryen. And this isn't a shadow baby like Melisandre's two shadow babies with Stannis Baratheon either. It looks like whenever a shadowbinder or a fire magic practitioner mates with someone, they produce a child that's formed entirely of shadow. These children are given birth with a specific purpose, like killing Renly Baratheon, for instance. And they disappear as soon as that purpose is fulfilled. But Alys's child with Aemond won't be anything like that. In fact, the baby will live for at least 2 years, at which point her mother will have taken control of Harrenhal and shaken up the succession to the Iron Throne with its mere existence. To be fair, Alys made certain claims about her relationship with Aemond that could have messed up the reign of Aemond III regardless. She says that Aemond didn't just impregnate her, he also married her secretly. So now any child she has is going to be true-born. We suspect that this will happen in the show as well, and that Aemond will marry Alys as a reward for saving his life. Whether he does it of his own volition or under her influence is a different matter altogether. But this is where the show and the books could hit a hard realign on their substance. It's because Aemond's marriage doesn't have enough viable witnesses that it isn't even considered to have taken place in the books. But that might not be true for the series. And moreover, even if he didn't marry Alys, his bastard through her could be just as dangerous to the succession. Gaemon Palehair, one of Aegon II's bastards, was made the whipping boy of King Aegon III so that his claim couldn't inspire hostile ambitions against the throne. At best, Alys's bastard could hope for the exact same treatment. And worst case scenario, it dies alongside its mother. But we don't know exactly what happens to mother and child because Fire and Blood ends before we learn of the Iron Throne's response to Alys proclaiming her son as the rightful king. All we know is they were dealt with and Harrenhal was given to House Lothston. Still, the fact that Alys's child is a tangible human child that doesn't have a carbon copy of her father's face seems to suggest that Alys's lady parts are still working in top condition, despite her being centuries old. It's further proof of her magical physiology with our eyes. Witches and wizards in this world aren't that lucky when it comes to birthing children of their own flesh. But a creature that can live for centuries mating with a human could potentially bestow that extended lifespan to their offspring without altering much about their baseline physiology. Without compatible sexes, humans wouldn't have been capable of breeding with the children of the forest or the green men in the first place. So the fact that Alys not only lives for so long but as a child as well, that too a Targaryen bastard, a dragon seed with incredible power coursing through its veins, it's just further proof for us that she's not entirely human, and an insane part of her physiology is that we didn't see coming, if we're being honest. But this nearly brings us to our last point, which is, her core magic system has been switched from the books. Everything we've discussed so far is show exclusive, because in Fire and Blood, it's suggested that Alys Rivers isn't an agent of the old gods, but the Lord of Light. That's right, guys, Alys is supposed to have been a red priestess, or at least a shadowbinder, because we're told things about her that are just not consistent with how magic of the old gods works. There are 3 things that specifically point to her being a follower of her lore. The first is what Aemon says to Daemon when they meet for their final battle. We won't get into the battle itself too much because we've already stuffed this video with details, but there's a relevant bit. At one point, Daemon asks Aemond how he knew where to find him, and Aemond replies that Alys saw him in her cookfire, and that she sees much more, which is the exact phrasing Melisandre uses to describe her visions. Then, several months after the dance, the Iron Throne sends a force to Harrenhal to retake the castle and cast down its witch queen. But the envoys claim that they saw a dragon in its halls, and Alys proclaimed her child by Aemond, the true king of Westeros. One of the soldiers who was spared her wrath was cursed as well. He was sent to Derry to speak of what he saw, and he had to warn everyone present not to laugh at his tale. If they did, he would die. And sure enough, one man snickered at his story. A shadow hand crept up the messenger's neck and choked him to death, which can only be shadow magic akin to Melisandre. These 3 clues suggest that Alys Rivers was originally some sort of red priestess figure, who probably came to Harrenhal on a mission to convert its most formidable ruler to the religion of the Lord of Light. Considering she's operating under a bastard name and seems to have lived near or at Harrenhal her entire life, it's possible she arrived during the reign of Harren the Black, because He was the most powerful king before Aegon's conquest. That would match the timeline we established as well, and Thoros of Muir could be her successor in the main story. But the decision to switch her religious background to the old gods has made a massive change in her physiology, in that all the magic she uses now is based in nature, not fire. Book Alys could probably cast glamours by bending light and shadow to her will, and paying enormous prices for it in blood and pain. Glamours are quintessential fire magic, and her being able to see visions through the flames is as well. As an agent of the old gods, Alys's control over her visions is a lot better in the show, and her ability to warg is an upgrade from what the Shadowbinders can do, because as far as we know, they don't overtly soul bond with animals. And if Alys is anything close to Melisandre in the books, then there's all sorts of disturbing things going on with her body as well, most likely. Melisandre's beautiful appearance is a glamour. She's actually some sort of fire demon whose blood is black and smoky, and she doesn't need to eat or sleep for more than an hour in the books. Alys, by contrast, does appear to eat and sleep in the show. But even if she couldn't, her blood isn't smoky. This change seems small when you think of her as a trope, but is actually a fundamental alteration that completely changes everything about Alys's physiology. And we hope we've spotted enough about it to have kept you guys engaged for this long. Let us know what you think about Alys Rivers' insane physiology and what it means for the rest of the House of the Dragon down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you're notified when we make more dragon content. We'll see you guys real soon with yet another video. So until then, stay safe, have a great day, and as always, stay marvelous.